Yes, sir. So in DI, I think that the portal is very helpful in DI because, they are basically like exact replicas of all of the tables and graphs that you get on the real paper. So, it was almost as if I was attempting the real paper. So normally you only get like, say, questions and stuff. But what I did was, the portal, it had the sectional mocks. So again, I gave all of the sectional mocks. Again, you don't really need the official mocks. You can obviously there are enough mocks in your portal. I consistently studied 5 to 6 hours every day. Obviously in the evening after coming from my classes, someday you don't have classes, so you don't go. And again, consistency I think was very important.
Hi Rohan, it's
I
so good to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Likewise.
Heartiest congratulations on that 705 score. That corresponds to a 98th percentile. We can see that you've been able to score a 90 on 90, which is a scaled score of 90 on verbal with a 100 percentile. Massive congratulations on that. Your data insights stands on a 93rd percentile with a score of 82, and we can see that you could score 83 in Quant. So I was suspecting that you might be a little bummed out with your performance on Quant, considering that it's an 80th percentile. But regardless, I think you've been able to cross the 705, correction, 700 barrier. And so, how did you feel when this score cropped up on the screen?
Yeah, so definitely I was really happy because like this was my target's minimum score. So I was initially when I started, I was aiming for at least a 705. And again, as you can see, what happened was that my quant didn't go as well. And the order in which I attempted the paper was quant, DI, then a break, and then verbal. So, I was really, when I was clicking the button, I to finish the paper, I wasn't really expecting a 705. I was maybe thinking like a 675, and I thought, I had to come back next week. And then I clicked it and it immediately loaded. I was, like very happy that,
Relieved.
okay, at least yeah, exactly.
Great. I mean, I can understand completely, but a 705, let me tell you, is a very competitive score for any program in the world that you would be aiming at. So we could start by finding something about yourself. You could maybe take some time to introduce yourself and what led you to start preparing for the GMAT and what led you to home down to top 1% as a partner in your GMAT test prep journey.
Yeah, definitely, sir. So basically, so I'm an engineering student at DTU. So it might, seem that an MBA is something that engineers do. It's a pretty stereotype. So I'll be very honest. During my first year, I, explored a lot of things. So I explored, finance and basically consulting and other tech fields too. And I realized that I resonated more with, non-tech fields. So like finance is something I'm really passionate about. I've also, opened a finance club in my college. So basically, I realized that an MBA is something, which would help me, pivot to that field and actually grow. Coming on, to top 1%, it is very really interesting. So what happened was, I think it was 2023. I was just starting my second year, and Sandeep sir, basically did a webinar in my college, an online webinar. So I just attended it. Let's just see what he says, like what's it about, and he told basically shared some really interesting insights about the GMAT and overall the pros of doing an MBA from a B school from the US, like an M7 school. So that really caught my eye because the things that he said, he shared that that for the C-suite roles, things like your senior leadership roles, and M7 MBA is something which is really helpful. So that's when I realized that GMAT is something that I have to give because it resonated with my long-term career goals. Then in 2024, when I was in my third year, I tried to like start prepping for the GMAT on my own, and I realized that it's not that easy. I need a structure. So then I did some research and I found out about the deferred MBA programs, and I realized that my fourth year, like I'm currently in my fourth year now, would be the best time for me to give my GMAT so that I can apply to the deferred programs in April. So I obviously knew about the GMAT top 1%. So I reached out to Richa ma'am, and she basically made me take a diagnostic test. And I realized that my quant and verbal are fine, but my DI is not that very good. So I definitely then was basically signed up with top 1%, and I then started my journey in August 2025 when I started my fourth year. And then yeah, it took me around I think 75 days, and I just gave the paper in October. It was my first attempt, and then yeah, I got the score.
Great. That was a wonderful introduction. Thanks for that. And really inspired to hear that you started the finance club at DTU.
Yeah,
So, yes, I'm sure going forward, I think this experience will also assist you a lot while you're applying for M7 schools, and that will be something on your profile that you would certainly like to highlight and accentuate. You have been able to secure a really impressive score on verbal.
yeah,
So, a perfect 90.
yeah.
So, have you always been so strong in verbal, or was it that there was certain content or some material that really helped you take your score up to that Q90?
Yeah. So basically, with verbal, the thing is that I obviously I see the thing is I'm an engineer. So when you look at my score, it seems a very counterintuitive because my quant is on the lower side and my verbal is a perfect 90, and it is usually the other way around with engineers. So the thing is, as I told you, I always knew I was, going to do an MBA, and I knew that a verbal is something, which is pretty important in an MBA. So during my first year, I made sure, to read basically magazines and articles. So I read The Economist a lot. So like I read every week, every edition of The Economist, which helped me with my reading speed. But still, obviously it's not that. During my initial mocks, which I gave before joining top 1%, I didn't get that good of a score because obviously, it's there's a difference between having a good reading speed and being able to solve those passages. When I, got the coaching, I really basically the octave technique, which is, that the famous technique of top 1%, that I think really helped me quite a lot because it made me realize the questions, which seem very tricky, they are also very structured. They're not like you have to be very smart or anything. They're very logical based. Especially one thing is, I would say my vocabulary is not that, my reading speed is very good, but my vocabulary is okay. One thing I like about the GMAT is, it really doesn't punish you for a bad or okay vocabulary. If you can read the passage and you can understand the logic behind it, then it's pretty easy. So again, being an engineer, logical reasoning is something I could definitely do, and that's why the material and the mocks that top 1% had. So I would say one thing is that mock papers are something which are really important, and I give a lot of them, especially the sectional mocks. So what I did was, instead of giving full length mocks in the starting, I took it section by section and I gave like 6 to 7, 8 mocks of every section till I perfected it. So for verbal, I solved all of the PDF of I think 200 almost passages, and I solved all of them, all of those passages in CR. Obviously, we have so many material in CR, I couldn't even complete it, to be very honest. They were like the questions were never ending. So I solved all of them. And then obviously you have to do time practice. So like Sandeep sir, suggested in the PDF that you should just use a timer on your phone and then just start the timer and then solve questions. So I started doing that. And that's when my accuracy, I would say, picked up. And in the exam, obviously, it was more also a bit of luck of because it's very difficult to get a perfect score, but I guess that day luck was on my side. So it is what it is hard work and but most importantly, structurally, following the PDF. So that Excel which gets shared, I think that was a really good thing because I really like to have structure in my preparation in any exam.
That is also inspiring to hear. I'm sure it luck didn't have any part to play in your verbal 90 score. And like you mentioned, reading The Economist certainly helps. But I think if anyone is looking at getting a very good score, even without having read or being a reader throughout, you can get that sort of scores and that sort of result if you practice with all the techniques that have been shared by us.
Yeah.
So, talking about the content, what were some of the content that really helped you in your prep journey? Especially, you said that you were not someone who considered himself to be very confident on DI. What were the particular resources in the DI section that really helped you increase your score to the 93rd percentile?
Yes, sir. So in DI, I think that the portal is very helpful in DI because, they are basically like exact replicas of all of the tables and graphs that you get on the real paper. So, it was almost as if I was attempting the real paper. So normally you only get like, say, questions and stuff. But what I did was, the portal, it had the sectional mocks. So again, I gave all of the sectional mocks of DI, and also there were, 3 or 4 PDFs that Sandeep sir shared, which had almost, I would say, 100 questions of basically all of the MSR and DI. So what that helped me to do is, get basically acquainted with all of the types of questions. Because with DI, I think one major advantage is, there's a pattern which repeats. Obviously, the data and stuff will change, but if you can get yourself acquainted with all of the questions and be ready and have a plan in mind. Because like what I did was I looked at DI and I realized that there are five type of questions. There's a data sufficiency, in which obviously we had the 256 question PDF, and I again solved all of them, which I think made my DS accuracy almost 80-90%. I'm not sure. For the multi-source reasoning and graphs, yeah, I just, went through all of the PDFs and I realized that I am very good at graphs. I am very good at charts. My MSR, which is the multi-source reasoning, is fine, and the two-part analysis is something I struggled with. So, but because I solved so many questions, I knew which question I had to, skip and which question I had to attempt. So obviously you get the choice of coming back to three questions. So I use it very strategically because it doesn't make sense, to be stuck at a question in DI. So you should know when to just like pick some options and then
Move
come
on.
back to it and cut your losses. Yeah,
Right. So you're talking like a finance bro now. You're cutting your losses and
yeah,
putting those stop losses.
exactly.
And it's really fun to hear you use all those terminologies. So you were a college student, right? You were in
Yeah,
one of the elitist programs of India. And I wanted
yeah.
to know whether you struggled balancing out your the time that you were devoting to college. Probably you might have even had to navigate some exams. How did you go about managing your time to prepare for the GMAT? How consistent did you say you were in your prep? And considering that you've put in a lot of work, how much time did it take to address this exam? Would you touch upon that?
Uh, yeah, sure. So one thing, is that I would say the one word is, as you said, consistency. I was very consistent throughout the journey. So I would say it took me 75 days and I almost studied every day. One thing that I had advantage of is, to be very honest, that in my fourth year, we didn't really have that many subjects. So one strategic choice that I made is we get a choice in our college for the final 2 years on how we want to distribute our workload. So since I knew, I obviously am going to use my fourth year for my MBA prep, I chose to overload my third year and took more subjects, and I had basically more free time in my fourth year. So that was one thing. Coming on to the number of hours, I would say I consistently studied 5 to 6 hours every day. Obviously, in the evening after coming from my classes, someday you don't have classes, so you don't go. And again, consistency I think was very important. I had 1 week I couldn't study that much because I had my exams, my mid-semester exams. But even then, I tried to find some time, maybe solve some, if not mocks, then maybe some question banks or maybe revise some formulas or anything like that. So I feel that it, to be very honest, one another thing about the GMAT is it's not that big of a commitment. It's like a 3 to 2 month prep if you do it right. So but I would say, that consistency is very important. Not It's better to study every day, 4 to 5 hours, instead of studying every, like, let's say 4 days for 12 hours or something and then not studying a day, because you need to have that connection throughout the journey.
Right. All of that was very relevant. And coming on to your test day experience, is there anything that threw you off balance on test day, or was the content very comprehensive for you to understand all the sort of patterns that you would receive on test day?
Yeah, so what one interesting thing was that actually my initially paper was scheduled on 18th October, and when I went to the center, there was a power outage. So then I had to reschedule it to 25th October. So I'll talk about the 25th. So when I went to the center, I was pretty well prepared. I did a lot of research on YouTube, just seeing how the experience is, like how when you go there, what they ask and everything. And it's very easy. They just ask for your passport, and then you can just go and check in. Again, the content was, that I think was one of the advantages that I had. Nothing on the paper, felt new. Every question, every in DI or verbal or even quant, everything was something that I had seen priorly. Every, formula or concept or anything which helped me, because normally when you see something on the screen, which you haven't seen before, and I think this is something that can happen to people, especially in DI, because in DI the resources are pretty not that common until unless you have a proper coaching. I didn't, really see anything on the screen that I didn't knew. That's what I said, cutting my losses. So immediately when I saw the question, I knew this is something that I can attempt. This is something I'm not sure about, and this is something I just have to go. I can solve this right now. I have to come back to save my time. So yeah, I would say the material and everything, it was all something that I'd seen before in my prep, and that really helped me.
Yes, I think it is extremely important to strategize in that way. And if you can place to your strengths, I think the DI section will also
Yeah.
happen for you and it'll work out for you. Talking about the mocks, you said you took a lot of mock practice from Portal. Did you also attempt the official mocks? Did you buy any of those mocks, or you stuck with our advice of just taking two mocks that are
Yeah,
available
so I
for
did.
free?
Yeah, so I did take the free mocks, and I also took the official mocks, because I'm really like think that mocks are the most important thing. But yeah, I would say that I also solved all of the portal mocks. So because mocks is something you can't get enough of, although I would say again, you don't really need the official mocks. You can obviously there are enough mocks in your portal. One thing I would like to say is that sectional mocks are really important too. So like full length mocks are fine, they are great, but sectional mocks are something, which I feel helped me really quite a lot. Because, the three sections, they're quite different. They demand different strategy, different timings, and different way to attempt them. And then there's the fact that you might be weaker in some section and stronger in other. So I initially solved all of the sectional mocks first. And I think that's something that helped me quite a lot to identify that my verbal is very strong and my quant, is not that great. In quant, what I tended to do was, that I kind of got stuck on a question. As I told you, initially because I'm an engineer, so there's
You're
obviously
an
kind of
algebro.
yeah,
I like
exactly.
to call that an algebro.
Yeah, exactly. So, I just got stuck onto a question, and until and unless I gave a sectional mock, I realized what I was doing. Enough, because what happens is when you give a full length mock, there are too many mistakes for you to able to analyze all of them. So it's better, give a sectional mock, and then you analyze that and see, what are the issues that you're facing. So my issue in mathematics was that I was getting stuck onto a question for 5 minutes, and once you do that, I think it's game over because you only get 2 minutes per question.
Absolutely, absolutely. That tends to drive the anxiety up so much that
Yeah.
then you start end up making a lot of silly errors and mistakes. So that is a very good strategy that I think going forward, if anyone is hearing this conversation, would also be able to glean from this conversation. Uh, so to wrap it all up, would you also want to impart some of your do's and don'ts for anyone who would be listening to this conversation that we are having at a later stage?
Yeah, definitely, sir. So, I would say for the do's, first and foremost is, follow the PDF, the Excel. So the Excel that, basically you share in the starting, I think that's something that is really helpful because the structure is very important in the GMAT prep, knowing when to attempt the mocks, when to attempt the practice questions, and when to start time practice. Because initially you don't know whether you want to do a timed or untimed practice. That is very important. Second is obviously analyzing mocks, because giving mocks is one thing, but you also need to analyze it and not just, analyze the questions, but also analyze strategy. Another thing I would like to say is that while you give your mocks at home, it's very important to choose a order, which order you want to attempt it in the final day and stick with it. And, I would say first maybe do two or three permutations and combinations, to see which attempt you want to do and which where you want to take the break. For me, it was that verbal at the end because verbal was my strongest. So the way I approach this is whatever happens in content DI, I can take a break, give myself a pep talk, and then just attack verbal and get a full score, which is basically what I did. In the break, I was pretty nervous, but I calmed myself down, saying that in verbal I am very good, so I'll just give my best, and whatever happens happens. So the order and the strategy is very important. Coming on to the don'ts, I would say particularly again just be consistent, don't really get demotivated from a mock score. A lot of time I didn't get good score in verbal too. So a lot of times, you can get low score in mocks, but that doesn't reflect your ability because there are a lot of factors. Sometimes you might not get a good score, so don't feel that, well, if I don't get a good score in mock, I won't get it in the paper. That's one. Second is obviously in verbal, I would say, time practice is very important. So a lot of time, I have my friends basically who did verbal good, but they didn't really do time practice. So what happens is your accuracy could be good while you do it without any time restriction, but it's important to have that timer, maybe not initially, but after you get comfortable with it, it's very good to have a mobile phone and just start a timer, let's say of 20 minutes and solve four passages. So that's very helpful. And yeah, I think these are the main strategies. Others are basically what you shared with me. Sandeep sir, in the all of the lectures that I attended, sir constantly shared the advices. So I just followed them very, rigorously, and that also helped me quite a lot.
I mean, that is the best advice that I've heard from any student so far that I've interacted with. Your do's and don'ts touch upon all the aspects that one has to keep in mind while preparing for the GMAT. And thank you so much once again for all those tips. I'm sure anyone who listens to this conversation at a later date would certainly be able to pick up a lot of valuable insights. Thank you once again for doing this. We at Top 1% are incredibly proud of you. Sandeep sir is incredibly proud. Wishing you all the best for your future endeavors, Rohan. Thank you once again.
Yes, thank you so much, sir.
All right,
Have
take
a
care.